Council. And this evening I'm joined by my colleague Joanna. So both of us are going to be giving some input into language acquisition and how we can support people with maybe low levels of English to acquire language. So there'll be kind of two sections this evening. The first section will be a bit theoretical, and then we're going to move on to some more kind of practical things that people can do to kind of facilitate communication and help people with language acquisition. If you have any questions throughout the session, just please pop them into the chat and we'll try to answer those questions as we you know, at appropriate points.
Sorry, Callum, just a quick question about the recording. I'm recording it to my device rather than the cloud. I've never actually personally recorded, you know, an entire session before. I think that should be okay, shouldn't it?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay. Just don't want anyone to be let down with no recording afterwards. Okay. That's fine. Thanks.
Okay, so by the end of today's talk, we hope you'll leave with a better understanding of some of the kind of underlying principles of language acquisition. But more importantly, we hope you leave with a better idea of how you can put these principles into practice to make communication easier with people with low levels of English, and you know, and also to help them with their English language learning and acquisition. In addition to that. So this chap here that you can see is Stephen Krausen. So for those who don't know, Stephen Krausen is an American linguist who's well known in the field of language acquisition and second language learning. The quote that you can see on screen is a very condensed version of his theory of second language acquisition. And hopefully this raises the question, how can we understand language when we don't how can we understand a language we don't know, let alone acquire it by understanding it? So in today's session, we hope that we'll be able to demonstrate how this is actually true and how we can use images and gestures and mimes and other techniques to actually put this theory into practice to help people with picking up English. Before we go on, it's important that we distinguish between two phrases and that are sometimes used interchangeably, but we'd like to make a distinction between them. The first one is language learning and language acquisition, but are these actually the same? I would say they're not the same, but what's the we want to talk about what the actual difference is between language learning and language acquisition. So when people think of language learning, they might think about traditional language classrooms. If you've had French or German classes before, you might have had a teacher who would spend a long time on the board writing out verbs, conjugations and endings, and you would have to memorize them. And so language learning often is about students having to maybe memorize rules of grammar and apply these in class tests and hope that one day that they'll be able to put all these rules together to produce language. Language acquisition, on the other hand, is more akin to riding a bike. If, for example, when you're learning to ride a bike, you don't learn about, where you put the center of gravity, or how, or the theory about balance and things. It's an intuitive process that you develop, where it becomes natural for you to then ride that bike. Just in the same way that teaching learners of English to add, say third person S. So for example, you might notice people learning English would say things like he sleep instead of he sleeps. Whereas acquisition, these things are kind of gradually built up with the more exposure that people get to a new language. They'll start to pick things up like grammar, vocabulary, expressions that they hear and that they understand. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a short story, and I want you to imagine that this is a language that you need for everyday life. So going to the post office, going to the GP, going to the shops. So someone new joining, going to the shops, making friends, applying for jobs, all that kind of thing. Okay. So, das ist Johannes und seine Freundin Martha. Heute hat Martha Geburtstag, aber Johannes hat kein Geschenk. Er will seiner Freundin Martha ein Geschenk kaufen, aber er hat kein Geld. Er meint, seine Freundin ein Geschenk zu basteln, aber er weiß nicht, wie man ein Geschenk bastelt. Er überlegt, Blumen gefallen Martha und Martha spielt Geige. Oh nein, er hat keine Zeit, ein Geschenk zu kaufen und er hat keine Zeit, ein Geschenk zu basteln. Eine Woche vergeht und Martha ist noch sauer auf Johannes. Okay, so what did you understand? Can you maybe put into the chat? How did you understand anything? Did you pick up anything? Was anything clear? What the topic was about? What was the story about? How did you feel? Shout out or write in the chat.
I think that was a big thumbs down from Leanne.
Leanne, do you want to come in and comment? How did you?
I don't. Was it German?
It was German, yeah.
Yeah, I don't speak German, so I found after about 5 seconds, my brain started to think about something else completely. So that, okay, that's not accessible to me, and it was quite difficult to focus on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the whole focusing and kind of drifting off, I think that's very relevant. Any other comments in the chat? I can't see the chat, Joanna. Has anyone else mentioned anything?
No, the chat is blank. Maybe that reflects people's faces. So like, why are we listening to German? This is not what we signed up for.
Mm-hmm. But hopefully that will give you can experience a little bit what other people might be feeling when they're maybe listening to English or Scottish accents and dialects and thinking what's happening. It's quite disorientating. Okay. Okay. So we began this presentation by kind of saying that we kind of learn language by getting exposed to it, by understanding language as we hear new language. But from the German story that you've just heard, you might be thinking, how is that actually possible? We've just had German again. We just had a German story, but we've not understood it. What could we actually learn from that? Okay, so a common myth that many people believe is that they just need to watch TV, listen to anything in the target language, the language that they're learning, and they'll eventually just pick it up. Okay, so, oh, someone's joining. So if we think about the German story, how many times would you need to hear the same German story again until you understood it? Would it help if I repeated the story, do you think? Would you eventually start to pick things up? Anyone? Any comments?
I don't think just repeating the same thing over and over again would help. I think it would be extremely frustrating, and it would have to be picked apart in some way for you to start to get the gist of the whole thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we look at the wee man that we've got here listening to the radio, okay, he's listening to Japanese radio. It's the same kind of idea with the German story. Hearing it again and again and again, exactly the same, might not actually help that person pick things up. Getting exposure in the target language is very, very easy. You know, we can all watch TV. We can, especially with English nowadays on YouTube. There's so many opportunities to get that exposure to language, but it might not be comprehensible. You're getting input into that language, but you're not getting input that's comprehensible. A term that we're going to look at a little bit more detail, okay? I think we would agree that the German story for many people was just noise. There was nothing in that had any meaning. It was just a string of noises. It might even be difficult to maybe point out and isolate single words within that stream of like sentences and words together. But Krausen says that we acquire language when we understand it. Therefore, if we want to acquire new language or help people acquire language, we need to make the input comprehensible. Otherwise, language acquisition is not going to take place. So this time, we're going to listen to the same story again, but we're going to have comprehensible input. Okay, that's good. Good. Ja. So, heute hat Martha Geburtstag. Heute hat Martha Geburtstag. Aber Johannes hat kein Geschenk für Martha. Johannes hat kein Geschenk. Johannes will seiner Freundin Marthe ein Geschenk kaufen. So, Johannes will seiner Freundin Marthe ein Geschenk kaufen. Aber Johannes hat kein Geld. Er hat kein Geld. Johannes hat kein Geld. Weil Johannes hat eine Idee. Er meint, seine Freundin Marthe ein Geschenk zu basteln. Okay? Er meint, seine Freundin Marthe ein Geschenk zu basteln. Aber er weiß nicht, wie man ein Geschenk bastelt. Er weiß nicht, wie man ein Geschenk bastelt. Er überlegt, überlegt. weiß, Blumen gefallen Martha. Blumen gefallen Martha. Und Martha spielt Geige. 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 Martha spielt Geige. Aber Johannes hat keine Zeit, ein Geschenk zu kaufen. Er hat keine Zeit. Er hat keine Zeit, ein Geschenk zu kaufen. Und er hat keine Zeit, ein Geschenk zu basteln. Eine Woche vergeht. Eine Woche vergeht. Und Martha ist noch sauer auf Johannes. Sauer auf Johannes. Okay. Okay. We are going to get into breakout rooms and maybe discuss what was the difference between the two stories. Did you understand more in the second story compared to the first? If you understood more, why did you understand more? What made it more understandable? Maybe if you didn't understand absolutely everything, that's normal, but I'm confident you will have understood more in that second version compared to the first story. So give me. Okay, so we'll go into two different rooms.